on a very important topic. So we welcome Dr. Sunita from CMC. She will be enlightening us with the welcome Dr. Sunita Arora ma'am, who is a very senior professor in from Amritsar. She was in SGRD and presently also as an honorary professor in SGRD. Over to you, Dr. Seema.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for your words of wisdom. Now, I welcome and introduce our speaker of the day, Dr. Shruti Kakkar, professor and in charge, the Thalassemia Hematology Center, CMC Ludhiana, a renowned clinician and practitioner who doesn't need any introduction. She has numerous publication under her name and started the first bone marrow transplant center in Punjab. And for chairing a session, we have a guest of honor, Dr. Sunita Arora Ma'am, honorary professor in SGRD Amritsar. Over to you, Dr. Shruti Kakkar ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Seema. And I would like to thank SAPA for giving me this opportunity to talk to our youngsters about anemia, especially on World Anemia Day. Just a couple of disclaimers. I don't know what is renowned, but I'm a teacher, and thank you for giving me this opportunity because there's so many things that we learn every day when we are preparing to teach our younger generations. Second, I did not bone marrow transplant. I merely joined it, and I'm still a student when it comes to bone marrow transplant. And the whole purpose was to offer good transplant services to all children in our city, and they don't in our city and state, so that they don't have to travel, to Delhi and other bigger cities for a transplant, which is easily accessible within their reach and free of cost for most of our thalassemia patients through government funding. So leaving that bit behind, let's talk of anemia and how can we think beyond hemoglobin. Starting with the definition, all of us know anemia refers to a reduction in oxygen carrying capacity of the blood, which can be defined as a hemoglobin or a
Ma'am,
red cell. Yeah.
ma'am, your
Yes.
slides are not visible. Only you are visible.
Okay, let me just check that again.
Initially, it was visible.
It was visible earlier, right?
Yes,
I'll
ma'am.
share it again, right? Mhm. Is it visible now, Seema?
Yes, ma'am. Make
Yeah.
it full screen.
I'll
Full
make it.
screen. Yeah.
Is it okay now?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely
Yeah.
fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I was talking about the definition of anemia. Anemia refers to a reduction in oxygen carrying capacity that could be due to a reduced level of hemoglobin or red cell mass that is below the two standard deviations below normal for our children. And once there is anemia, there are a lot of physiological mechanisms that come in, such as increased cardiac output, tachycardia, to help achieve the same level of oxygen. And there is increased in the 2,3 DPG, leading to decreased affinity of hemoglobin and increased oxygen offloading in the periphery. As we know, children are not just small adults. There are different cutoffs for labeling anemia in specific age groups, and a hemoglobin of between 10 to 10.9, which we usually think it's normal, is considered mild anemia in young children between the age of 6 months to 59 months. And the cutoffs are well defined by the world, by our government, national and WHO. But that's something that gets missed in our day-to-day practice. In our country, the prevalence of anemia has actually risen over last 5 to 6 years. During the NFHS 4 survey, the prevalence of anemia in children and adolescent girls were roughly around 55 to 60%. And but in spite of Anemia Mukt Bharat program, it has increased to 67.1% by 2021. And looking at prevalence of anemia in Punjab, it's a total of about 70% in children between 6 months to 5 years of age. Anemia can be classified in various ways, and this 71% includes all these causes. So, some of this could be prevalence of celiac disease and thalassemia, which is common in our part, but a large majority remains nutritional that can be managed. This slide just shows you that there are different, etiologies in different age groups, and especially in younger children, it's the nutritional anemias which are extremely common. Now, why are we so bothered about anemia that we're celebrating a World Anemia Day, and all the pediatric organizations are keeping special talks on anemia? Because it's just not about hemoglobin and fatigue. It's all about mental development and the intellectual development of the child. So if you're able to tackle anemia well during the pediatric age group, you look at a better adult in a population, and probably a better GDP of the country, as highlighted by IAP president yesterday in one of the talks. So if we look at it, we have knowledge of how to manage anemia. There is no dearth saying we don't know how to manage anemia. We have lab investigations, a simple CBC and other investigations are available in every city. And we have drugs which are easily available, but in spite of all these easily available things, we still have 70% population of children which is anemic. That means that there is something that we are not doing right, and we are not able to tackle the basic problem that we are dealing with. Yesterday, in view of World Anemia Day, this cartoon was launched by IAP president, and that meant that acronym of SMART was given, that is to screen children and adolescents for anemia by doing their hemoglobin, manage nutrition and prevent anemia by giving appropriate iron, B12, and folic acid rich food, assess the cause, give the right treatment, and track the response by looking at the rise in HB. So when we know that we have to be smart, there are certain things which we are not doing smartly. So let's look at some basic things which we are not doing in the way that they should be. So that's why I've labeled this talk after yesterday's poster, that let's learn what is not smart, right? So, and because today's 13th, we will be looking at 13 not so smart gestures that we do. The first one being not taking appropriate history. A simple history can give you a clue about the etiology and the rapidity at which the anemia has developed. It can also give you clues about how to manage a patient if you just spend a little time on taking history. Let's go through a couple of cases. Like, this is a 3-year-old child, female child, who came to the OPD with a URTI, cough, cold, some loose stools, abdominal distension. There was no past history. Birth history was normal, but on examination, the pediatrician saw that there is a pallor present. So based on that history, if we look at it, we can make certain inferences that there is no history of blood loss, there is no history of hemolysis. So probably here we are looking at a child who was born well, but probably did not receive enough nutrition, and here we are dealing with a slowly developing nutritional anemia. Look at another child who's a 12-year-old adolescent female, presented with generalized weakness, difficulty walking, and on and off fever. She's a vegetarian, and one look at her and you can probably make out the diagnosis that she's also suffering from a nutritional anemia at the other end of the spectrum. That's megaloblastic anemia. Looking at our third patient, a 5-year-old previously healthy child who had pallor for 3 days, dark colored urine, and breathing difficulty. So that much history gives us that whatever has happened acutely. So this child needs urgent treatment, urgent evaluation, admission in presence of breathing difficulty. And he had this history of fever a few days back. So he had some viral insult, probably leading to hemolysis. That's why he's developed this pallor and dark colored urine over a short period of time. Few more patients, like this 6-year-old girl who had hemoglobin of 6.2, but is active, playful, and there is no feature of tachypnea or tachycardia, whereas an 8-year-old boy with hemoglobin of 8, post-traumatic, presents with hypertension. So what this tells us, that history can give you etiology, history can give you progression. Also, something that you need to understand, that hemoglobin is not always equal to severity. It's hemoglobin and the rapidity at which the hemoglobin falls that will tell you the severity of symptoms. So what is it in the history that that you can tell, which the hemoglobin does not tell you? Hemoglobin does not tell you about the oxygen delivery. It just tells you about oxygen carrying capacity. It doesn't tell you about perfusion, what is the compensation, or what is going on, and not even the rate of fall. So that's one smart thing that all of us need to start doing, is not just look at the reports, go back, take a proper history, and try reach an etiology, and look at the complications that have happened because of low HB in every patient that presents to us with anemia. Moving on to the second, once you have a patient like this, what is the first sample? What is the first sample that you send? It's a simple CBC or a complete blood count. So if you look at a report, this is a report which came last year. This child had presented with some fever. Now you look at this report, the child paid about 250 rupees for this report. And what is the information that we got here? It's just about the counts and the differential, and there's not much history that much information that we can get here apart from the red cell indices. But right now we have in every city labs which can give you an automated report, which can give you not just the counts and sizes, they can give you the diameters of the cell, the percentage of different cells, and all the with just 100 microliter of blood within a period of 1 minute, you can have a lot of information with an error probability of less than 1%. So if you get a report like this, what should be your next step? The first thing is that you should be looking at all three cell lines. Look at the HB, the TLC, and the platelet. Here we look at the child. Here we look at the child, the HB is 3.6. The total leukocyte count is 3,700 or 3.71, and platelet count of 82. So here we have a child who has probably presented with pancytopenia. And if you look at just the red flags which this report within just 1 minute gives you, it tells you that the child has pancytopenia, there is probably presence of blast, there is atypical lymphocytes, and the cost of this report was again 300 rupees. So if with just a 50 rupees extra expenditure, you're getting much more information as compared to the previous report that you have. So when you order CBC, make sure that you order it from a lab that gives you an entire spectrum, not just a CBC, TLC, DLC, and RBC parameters like MCV, MCH, MCHC should be a must, and should not be. You should not try to save money on that. Instead, spending money may save a lot of other unnecessary investigations, because red cell parameters like MCV, MCH, RDW will give you a lot of information and will help you reach a diagnosis, also will help you in treating a patient. The newer Coulter reports, maybe they are not available everywhere. They give you the retics percentage, they tell you about the immature reticulocyte fraction, nucleated RBCs, and even the volume of the reticulocyte. So as we get better machines and better Coulters available, it is possible to make a lot of diagnosis with just these red cell parameters. A word of caution, always interpret CBC in context with the patient's clinical picture, not just look at the report. An automated analyzer, remember, cannot replace the need of the peripheral blood film. So now just look at, because we're talking of anemia today, we'll talk about the red cell parameters and the red cell disorders. When you see a CBC report and you see the RBC parameters, there is a rule of three that you need to look into. The hemoglobin is usually 3 times the RBC count, and the calculated hematocrit is usually 3 times the hemoglobin. If that is not falling in place, that's when something is not right, and you should look in further detail and try and see. So here we see the RBC count is about 6.4, but the hemoglobin is roughly 2 times, not 3 times the RBC. So here you should try and see, probably there is some discrepancy in the hemoglobin and the RBC count, and probably this needs further evaluation. Not, it's not a simple CBC or red cell parameter that we can leave. Moving on to MCV. So if you see this report here, we have a hemoglobin of 3.6 and the RBC count of 1.38. So going by our rule of 3, our hemoglobin is roughly 3 times the RBC count, and the hematocrit is 12.9, which is roughly 3 times the hemoglobin, that is 3.6. So here I think everything is going hand in hand. But the next parameter that you see is a mean MCV. So if you see this 3-year-old child and you look at MCV of 72.9, most of us are going to look at this value. It's 80 to 100 and probably ignore this. But remember, the MCV has values which are age related. So there is an upper limit and a lower limit for a particular age. For a 3-year-old child or a 5-year-old child, you can just calculate the MCV using age. The lower limit for a 5-year-old child would be 70 plus 5, that is 75 femtoliters, and the upper limit will be 84 plus 0.6 into age, that is 84 plus 3, roughly 87. So this 92.9, which is apparently normal as per the given report, is actually way beyond the upper limit for that particular child. So the not so smart thing that we do, the third not so smart thing is we don't interpret the value as per the child's age, and we go by the values which are given in that report. So that's something that we need to learn, and we need to remember that next time you get a CBC, don't interpret the MCV as per the adult values, go by the pediatric values. As you can see in this chart, that they are varied. An MCV of 108 can be normal for a cord blood sample, but a 92 can be abnormal for a 5-year-old child. Moving on to mean corpuscular hemoglobin, that's MCH, that tells you the amount of hemoglobin in a particular cell. So MCV and MCH are corroborating with each other when it comes to iron deficiency anemia and thalassemia trait, whereas MCV is much better than MCH in patients with hemoglobin E, hemoglobin constant spring, and dimorphic anemia. A very high MCH is usually indicative of stress erythropoiesis, because you will have nucleated RBCs which will be present in the periphery. Moving on to MCHC, that is the hemoglobin contained in each red blood cell. MCHC is usually constant beyond the intrauterine life. The only disease that you can pick up by MCHC is hereditary spherocytosis. If you have an MCHC of more than 36, then you're looking at, in presence of a patient who's has hemolysis history, then probably you should be looking at MCHC, and you can make a diagnosis of hereditary spherocytosis. Next parameter that you see often is a RDW, that is the red cell distribution width. As you can see in the diagram here, RDW is basically the difference of size between the smallest and the largest red blood cell, and it gives you the degree of anisocytosis that you see in a peripheral blood. Now you see this, we have two kinds of RDWs that we see. One is an RDW-ST, that's the standard deviation, and the other one is CV, that is coefficient of variation. The RDW-ST is just a numerical value. You take the largest red cell, lowest red cell, and divide it by the and just subtract the lower one from the maximum one, you get a value, and that's RDW-ST. RDW-CV is when you look at the middle of the 50th centile, and then you divide it by the MCV of the sample. So if you have a child who's microcytic hypochromic, the first thing, if you see a MCV, what is the next thing that you should be looking at? The next thing ideally you should be looking at is RDW. If you have a microcytic hypochromic anemia and you have a high RDW, that's when you're looking at iron deficiency anemia. If you have a low RDW, that means all your cells are uniform in size and there is barely any variation. That means you're looking at thalassemia trait or anemia of chronic disease. Now just look at this report. This is a 6-year-old girl. Her hemoglobin is 10.7. WBC is 12.5. The differentials look okay, and a platelet of 407. She's presented with an upper respiratory tract infection, and because of fever, we just got the CBC done. So, do you think there is any abnormality here? So, most of us looking at HB of 10.7 will actually not do anything, right? But if we look at our, WHO guidelines or the NHM guidelines, an HB of 10 to 10.9 will be considered mild anemia in this age group. So here we have a patient who has isolated anemia, which often gets missed. Then the next value that we will look at is MCV, which is 74.4. The lower cutoff for her at 6 years should be 70 plus 6, that is 76. And the upper cutoff for MCV should be 87.6. My apologies, this is as per 6 years, this is not 3. And if you look at RDW, it is 19.8, right? So if we have a low MCV, low MCH with high RDW, we are looking at a child with iron deficiency anemia. You can do it also by doing a Menzer index, that is MCV divided by the RBC count, and your Menzer index here is more than 13. Hence, we confirm, in a way that yes, our child has some iron deficiency. Here, looking at another 3-year-old child, we have a HB of 10.8. And again, most of us will not act on this HB of 10.8. WBC is okay here. Platelet count is slightly on the higher side, probably because the child is recovering from an infection. Look at the MCV, which is 58.9. In our previous patient for HB of 10.7, MCV was around 73, right? Here we have an MCV which is very low as compared to the hemoglobin level. And if you look at the RDW, it is 17.2. So we said if there is microcytosis and RDW, it should be IDA. But here comes, a little clause which I will discuss with you. Here MCV is low, and if we do the Menzer index, it is 9.83. One more parameter that I need you to look at is 5.99. If you look at our previous patient, it was the RBC count was well within the same range. So here, the not so smart thing that we do is we don't look beyond hemoglobin. So in a common scenario in a busy OPD, we would have just looked at that report and sent the patient off that there's nothing else, and we usually miss out on looking at MCVs and RDWs. Why is it so important to look beyond? Remember, there are different stages of iron deficiency, and while our stores are being depleted, the our HB and MCV, all red cell parameters remain normal. Once we have iron restricted erythropoiesis, that means our stores have been completely depleted and our red blood cells are being produced while our body is getting deficient in iron. We start seeing changes. By the time HB has reduced, we have finished all our store and all our erythrocyte iron. So if you see a HB of 10.7 or a HB of 10.8, actually our patient is in this stage. And we have already lost that time, and we have passed that stage of iron restricted erythropoiesis. Now, how can you differentiate between iron deficiency anemia and thalassemia trait? We talked about the MCV. The MCV is low in both, but MCV is much lower in patients with thalassemia trait as compared to RBC, as compared to the HB. But look at the RBC count. This is what gives the clue. The RBC count is reduced in iron deficiency anemia. However, it is increased in thalassemia trait because your body is trying to compensate that small size. So this is something that I usually say in your iron deficiency anemia, the hemoglobin, mean corpuscular volume, and the RBC count, all three of them are proportionately low. So if you have a mildly low hemoglobin, the MCV will also be mildly low and RBC count may be towards the lower range of normal, whereas RDW would be high. Whereas in thalassemia trait, hemoglobin can be normal or low normal. Your MCV will be very low as compared to the hemoglobin, like we saw in our second patient. The RBC count will also be higher, and RDW may be normal to slightly increase. So that's how you differentiate. The only thing that I see after doing hemoglobin is look at the RBC count, because it's low in IDA and high in thalassemia trait. But remember, in real life, not everything is black and white except penguins, and we have different etiologies can actually coexist, and we can have a scenario where we can have a thalassemia trait with iron deficiency anemia. So what will happen in thalassemia trait with iron deficiency anemia? The hemoglobin will actually reduce further. If you look at the RDW here, it is increased, right? So that's why you have a mixed kind of a picture, not a clear-cut IDA versus thalassemia trait. And if you do an HPLC at this stage, there is a possibility that you will, miss out on a diagnosis of thalassemia trait because iron deficiency anemia leads to a falsely low HbA2. So when we finish microcytosis, let's look at the macrocytosis. When the MCV is on the higher side, the macrocytic anemias can be classified as megaloblastic or non-megaloblastic, and high MCV with normal it can also be classified as high MCV with normal or high RDW. So if you have a patient with macrocytosis, the first thing is to make a slide and look at it that there is no spurious macrocytosis or there is no clumping of red cells so that the Coulter is counting many red cells as one, right? Then on the smear, look at presence of macrovalocytes or hypersegmented neutrophils. If you find one of these, then you're looking at megaloblastic anemia. If no, then probably it is a non-megaloblastic or a plain macrocytic anemia. Megaloblastic anemias are mainly because of B12 and folate deficiency. There are few drugs, inherited disorders that can lead to megaloblastic anemia. If you find that you have non-megaloblastic anemia, the first thing would be to do a reticulocyte count, and the high MCV could be because of reticulocytosis, a recovering marrow from a viral infection or a supplementation of iron B12, or it could be a normal retic count where you are looking at probably a Diamond-Blackfan or Fanconi's anemia, or it could be because of metabolic things like hypothyroidism or liver disease. So here we have a 5-year-old child who's presented with HB of 4.7. The WBC count and the platelet count is normal. Next thing we do is look at the MCV, which is 84.1. So we have a normocytic anemia, and we do look at the RBC count, which is also low. So here again we have an isolated anemia. The MCV is within normal range. But what additional information that the Coulter machine has given us that the reticulocyte count is 14.9. So we have a very high reticulocyte count, and we have a factor here which is an immature reticulocyte fraction. That is within the retics also. What is the immature reticulocytes which are there? The immature reticulocyte fraction is very high, which is 38.5. So, to understand what is immature reticulocyte fraction, this is actually the most immature form. So, if you have even this fraction increase, that means your body is responding to the marrow, responding to whatever problem was there, and body is recovering. And you can use these by saying. So here we had a child who had very high retic count and a very high immature reticulocyte fraction. So this could be a child who's recovering from an acute hemolysis or a blood loss. So with the Coulter report, this is the information that how the reticulocyte count and the immature reticulocyte fraction can help us and make a diagnosis. So what we learn here that the not so smart thing that we do at times is deviate from the systematic algorithm based models, and just go haywire, take some reports, and try to save money by not doing simple things like retic count, and that actually doesn't help but harms. So once you've made a diagnosis, we move on to the treatment. So if you've made a diagnosis of IDA as per the Anemia Mukt Bharat program, we can make a presumptive diagnosis of iron deficiency anemia with presence of risk factors like diet, poor socioeconomic status, and mild microcytic anemia. We can start a trial of iron, which is 3 mg per kg per day, and the diagnosis will be confirmed if you see a hemoglobin response. We can do additional testing if you feel the child does not fall in the age group where we have 6 months to 5 years when we have a very high incidence of anemia, or if the child is presenting with severe anemia. So what investigations can be done? We can do biochemical investigations looking at the storage iron, the plasma iron, and the red blood cell indices. Red blood cell indices, I think we have discussed in details. The biochemical investigations which look at storage is serum ferritin, which is less than 15 is diagnostic of IDA. But a lot of times when patients present to us, they have coexistent infections, and it's difficult to interpret ferritin in the presence of infection. But if you have a low ferritin even in presence of infection, that means the child is definitely deficient in iron. And between serum iron and serum transferrin, that is something that can be done. And you can calculate a transferrin saturation, and a transferrin saturation of less than 15% is considered iron deficiency anemia. The not so smart thing that we do here is ordering unnecessary investigations, like ordering ferritin in a patient who's febrile, or doing investigations in a clear-cut child with iron deficiency anemia rather than giving a trial of iron. So here we have an example of an iron profile that we got from a child. Here serum iron is 16 and a TIBC is increased to more than 400. We look at a ferritin which is 7.8. So what would be the transferrin saturation here? That's serum iron divided by ferritin, and that comes as 3.27%. And we just looked at the values that less than 15% is diagnostic of iron deficiency anemia. There are some newer investigations that can be done. However, right now we don't use them in our day-to-day practice. The newer investigations which can be available, some of them are in the automated hematology analyzer, like mean reticulocyte hemoglobin content. As we know, reticulocytes are the freshest RBCs. So if they are deficient in iron, you pick up an iron deficiency earlier. Low density hemoglobin is a marker of MCH basically. So it will tell you that the mean corpuscular hemoglobin is much less. Within the biochemical parameters, we can look at transferrin receptors, hepcidin, and erythropoietin. But right now, we are talking of not ordering tests in everybody. So these would be for a selected group of patients. So when we look at these, ferritin, we were talking of differences between thalassemia trait, iron deficiency anemia, and a combined state. You will have a thalassemia trait with IDA will present with the biochemical parameters which are suggestive of reduced iron, increased TIBC, and reduced serum ferritin. We've discussed about Menzer index in our cases. If you see response to iron, there will be partial improvement in a patient who's thaltrate with IDA, and we must do HbA2 after we have given iron for 2 to 3 months rather than hurriedly doing it in a patient who's presenting with ITA. Now, we said yes, we'll treat with a presentive diagnosis of iron deficiency anemia. We need to understand what drug, what dose, and what duration that we should be giving it, right? So just to look at the kind of drugs which are available. This is an old paper. This is about 6-7 years old paper, where in the Indian drug formulary there were 621 formulations of iron which were available, and about 230 of them were oral liquid preparation, and the cost ranges from 1.26 rupees to 188 for the same iron which is available. And if you look at the hematinic preparations, now there were 33 preparations which had only iron salt, another 25 which had iron with folic acid, and there were 174 preparations which had all of these vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and a lot of miscellaneous nutrients, I don't know what. So that's something that we should be looking at. What are we ordering and what are we writing? So these are some of the drugs that are available. The ferrous forms like ferrous gluconate, sulfate, ascorbate, fumarate, these are the preferred versions because of their higher bioavailability. We have certain newer formulations which are available, and they're mainly because why are they used? Because we feel that they have less GI effects and less toxic potential. But is it really worth it in our scenario to treat with expensive preparations? We need to go back and ask ourselves. The dose can vary from 3 to 6 mg per kg per day. It can be given once a day if your patient is experiencing some GI disturbances. Iron can be given even twice a day to bi-weekly, depending on the GI tolerance, and both of these will result. Of course, the response would be a little slower if you're giving bi-weekly, but it will result in improvement because of the role of hepcidin. So the not so smart thing that we do is not knowing our prescription well. What are we writing? So it's important that we write the prescription well and then we explain it well to our patients when we write any iron preparations. Then what we do is once the hemoglobin becomes normal, that's when we stop iron preparations. So remember to replace stores and not just the hemoglobin. And that's the ninth not so smart thing that we do. We just stop when the hemoglobin normalizes, and we don't replenish the whole store when we're treating iron deficiency. What is the usual response? If you see the response, the reticulocyte count starts increasing in 2 to 3 days. Patients start feeling better actually immediately after the first dose. The activity improves. the child becomes more active, the appetite gets better. Hemoglobin can take about 1 week to 2 months. The normalization takes time, and it takes about 3 to 4 weeks for the hemoglobin to start increasing. So when you start somebody on iron, you look for hemoglobin after 4 weeks if it's a mild to moderate anemia, and if the hemoglobin is increased by more than 1 gram, it's a responder. What if you do not see an increase? What are we supposed to do? So we can call a patient iron refractory if the hemoglobin increase was less than 1 gram, provided the compliance was okay and the patient was getting the drug. But if you do not get an improvement, what are we looking at? We're either looking at an incorrect diagnosis, we've missed a THALT rate or an underlying anemia of chronic disease, or the diet has not been improved and there is an ongoing blood loss. The patient is not taking iron properly, non-adherent, insufficient dose, or there is an incorrect way of administering, or the patient has an underlying GI disorders, that's like celiac disease, which is pretty common in our part of the country. So the nine so smart thing that we do is we do not advise appropriate diet. We sometimes do not advise not to give iron with milk, right? Or add vitamin C with food. So these are little things that can go a long way in making sure our children get iron, what we give them. Also, a lot of we in India have a passion for cow's milk, and all our mothers and grandmothers want to give milk, right? So what is the issue with cow's milk? Cow's milk interferes and causes iron deficiency by various mechanisms. One is it replaces the weaning food. It itself is a poor source of iron, and the cow's milk protein induced colitis can actually result in occult blood loss. So, to prevent iron deficiency anemia, we should restrict iron, preferably just exclusive breastfeeding, and add, weaning foods rather than adding milk per se. But if in case milk has to be given, then restrict it to less than 720 ml and timely introduce the uh, weaning foods. So, would you like to give IV iron in certain conditions? Yes, there are few conditions, like somebody with a GI disease, intolerance to oral iron. Although I remember only one child in last 15 years where I had to use an oral IV iron only because of intolerance. If you need a rapid correction because this patient is posted for some surgery, malabsorption state, you're looking at iron refractory, iron deficiency anemia, or your patient has an underlying cardiac or renal disease. The iron preparations which are available have become better over the years, and now we have safer formulation like ferric carboxymaltose, which have low immunogenicity, and there is a better response. However, that still does not warrant an IV, IV treatment for each and every child with iron deficiency, because oral supplementation is as good as iron there. But there are certain indications like CKD or a refractory iron deficiency anemia where you may use the recommended drug in a recommended dose if required. So the not so smart thing is, now that we have safer formulation available, give IV iron to everybody. So you should restrict the inappropriate use of IV iron. What is the role of blood transfusion in nutritional anemias? We saw our two patients. One was HB of 6 but stable. So that is a child who will not receive blood transfusion. But somebody post trauma HB of 8 but in cardiac failure or requiring a surgery, then that's an indication. So the not so smart thing that we do is we just go by HB of less than 7. We look at HBs of 5 or 6, and start transfusing the patient rather than looking at the compensation and the physiology. So when not to transfuse, if you have a stable chronic iron deficiency, you have an underlying thalassemia trait, there is mild asymptomatic anemia, correctable. A B12 deficiency, even in HB of 4.5, one dose of B12 will result in an improvement in HB quickly. So you don't really need to give blood transfusion, right? Third, moving on to the government initiative, we all know about the Anemia Mukt Bharat program, the 6 into 6 into 6 strategy, and we have 6 beneficiaries, which include children as well. And as per the government, all children between 6 months to 59 months should receive bi-weekly iron, that is 1 ml of iron and folic acid. The syrup contains 20 milligrams. but how many of our children are actually getting it? So the not so smart thing that we do is that we treat and then we forget, right? We do not provide prophylaxis to all our patients as recommended by the national guidelines. Just at the last few words about the B12 deficiency, we have various drugs like cyanocobalamin, hydroxycobalamin, and methylcobalamin, which is oral. The dose can start from 250 micrograms to 1 mg. It can be given parenterally or orally, and duration will depend on the underlying condition. A patient with pernicious anemia or a neurological disorder will, needs lifelong prophy as compared to somebody who had a dietary deficiency, and you can probably correct it by prescribing appropriate diet. So when you prescribe oral cobalamin, remember small malnourished children have a risk of life-threatening hypokalemia. So you start with lower dosages and the dose increases as the age of the child increases. You need parenteral if you have neurological dysfunction or cognitive impairment. Otherwise, the oral dose is as good as an IV dose. And for pernicious anemia, you need a life, and children with malabsorption, you need a lifelong monthly prophylaxis. Folic acid, the dose actually required is very low. It's just 1 mg per day. You need to continue it for 3 to 4 weeks, and rather than just a few days. And but we get a tablet which is 5 mg. So instead of breaking the tablet, we end up giving the whole tablet on a daily basis rather than a one fourth or one third tablet. So the not so smart thing that you can end up doing, is giving folic acid without B12, because as it's mentioned here, the folic acid treats only the hematological manifestations. But if you have a concomitant B12 deficiency, the patient's neurological manifestations can worsen and patients can develop a paraparesis kind of picture, right? So what's not so smart at the end of the 13 not so smart things that we do is we treat numbers too quickly or we completely ignore them. Hemoglobin becomes our decision trigger rather than the physiology, and because of all these, harm usually follows our reflex actions. So the smarter approach would be to have a clinical stability, clinical look at the clinical stability, look at the MCV, RDW, and reticulocyte count, interpret all this in the clinical context, and then take your call about investigations and treatment rather than a just a knee jerk reaction. So with that, I would like to end my talk, and if there are any questions, I would be happy to take them. Thank you. Ma'am, we can't hear you. Sunita ma'am is not audible. She's speaking, but she's not audible.
She is there, but unmute me. मैं सर मैम ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਕਿ ਅਨਮਿਊਟ ਕਰ ਦਿਓ ਨੇ
Hello,
हो गया यस मैम यस
am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. At the outset, thank you so much, team Satluj Academy of Pediatrics, under the visionary leadership of Dr. G.S. Narang, for giving me this opportunity. Congratulations for taking this great initiative on the World Anemia Awareness Day, just a day after the release of Presidential Action Plan, highlighting smart approach by smart pediatricians. And today again it's a smart day for us listening to Dr. Shruti Kakkar. As it has been emphasized by Dr. Shruti, ironically the prevalence of anemia is higher according to the NFHS 5 survey. The hardest hit is the 6 months to 59 months age group. Though the 6 into 6 into 6 strategy is in place, the fault lies probably in the earnest implementation of the government's program. Though 70% of the anemias are nutritional deficiency anemia, and most commonly the iron deficiency anemia. So the earnest implementation of the government program will go a long way to improve the physical health, the cognitive abilities, and scholastic performance of the children, ultimately improving the micro and macroeconomics of the nation on the whole. As we all know, all the anemias are not iron deficiency. So, as it has been emphasized by Dr. Shruti, looking and thinking beyond hemoglobin numbers, paying attention to other cell lines and RBC indices, along with the history and a good clinical exam, will help in making smarter decisions in pediatric anemia. We all know that Dr. Shruti is a very passionate hemato-oncologist and a compassionate human being at the same time, almost a mother figure to the patients and thalassemics in particular. And this was a great learning experience listening to her. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Patani, sir, Dr. Nava has joined us. Sir,
Sir, we can't hear you. You're muted. Dr. Randhav.
um, Nava sir, unmute करना.
Hello, good evening, everybody.
हाँ जी, good evening, sir.
We see significant number of patients, especially adolescents with B12 deficiency or megaloblastic anemia. And what should be the duration of treatment? Most of the time, we don't find a cause. As a general rule, we try to evaluate maybe malabsorption, celiac, and only vegetarian families might have, but their intake of milk is significant. Especially in Punjab, milk is a good source. So why they are deficient? Can we hit the cause? What exactly is the cause?
So probably one thing is that milk is a good source, but the amount of milk and the quality of milk, it's difficult to say, right? There
Right.
could be some lactose intolerance, so that whatever they're giving, with adolescents, it doesn't really suit them that well. The other thing, the duration that you're saying, if somebody has megaloblastic anemia, the duration has to be about 3 to 6 months. But it depends on correction of the diet. If you're not able to correct the diet, like we see certain patients who are absolutely, now a lot of them are becoming vegan as well, so then you need to keep them on a monthly prophylaxis, as we saw our patients with with pernicious anemia and malabsorption state. But if you're able to correct the diet, then we can stop at 3 months, and once the normal erythropoiesis has come into picture.
Right. And second thing I always feel is we always talk of government program, government attitude. Government doesn't talk of our attitude as a pediatrician in the
Definitely.
private setup or in the government setup even. But we are bit lax on our attack on anemia. Still, a very, very significant number of population of children, whatsoever reason is there, is anemic. So we need to be either we see over treatment, even newborns have been given on discharge iron drops, or there is under treatment that it's not getting followed up. So we need some policy from our IAP side also, that we need to be more aggressive and more outreach as far as community programs are concerned.
I think completely agree with you, sir. That is why I highlighted our, not so smart moves, where we do not put them on prophylaxis. When we treat, we leave it in between. And the whole point I highlighted those two children with 10.7 and 10.8 is because till HB falls below, 8 or 8ish or something, a lot of us do not. That includes me also. I'm not finger pointing. That 10.5 we consider it's normal, but it's a stage where already iron deficiency has reached us, stage 3 where all the stores are depleted. We need to, start looking at HBs much more closely, and not just the HB, look at the MCV and RDW. Even in presence of a normal HB, if you see a high RDW, please supplement iron, ask for history, dietary history. Probably, sir, in Punjab, if we go back to good instead of chini and start using apni lohe ki kadhai, I think many things would be sorted. Right. So, ferrous sulfate actually is the best preparation when it comes to response, but unfortunately, there is no preparation available in the private and the feasibility is low. So, ferrous fumarate and ferrous gluconate, ascorbate, these are certain preparations that can be used. Although there are children who will not tolerate this, so it will have to be modified. But go by ferrous, preparations, and stick to preparations which have only ferrous salt and folic acid. Don't go with fancy formulations which have a lot of extra ingredients that probably not going to help and add to just the cost and the GI upset. So go by ferrous forms, start low. A lot of times we don't start with 3 mg, we start with 1 mg per kg. Let the gut get used to iron, and follow up where you increase it to 3 mg per kg or to even 6 mg per kg. So it depends on making slow start. As if somebody is iron deficient, the iron bioavailability and the ability of the body to absorb iron is so good that even tiny dosages will go in long run rather than giving high dosages. A lot of times practically we put a lot of stress on diarrhea and viral illnesses. So remember, you do not need to stop iron for tiny infections here and there. Thoda sa cough, cold, ya slight diarrhea, don't emphasize. Otherwise, a lot of times parents start interrupting iron therapy because we told them fever ho to band kar dena, right? So unless and until it's a severe infection, there is no need to stop iron for a mild cough and cold. So let's not let's avoid putting a lot of stress on stopping iron during infections. And if it's a high grade fever, patient will come to you, and that's the time you can tell them to stop. Absolutely. Yes. So no, there is definitely that alternate day is as good as daily. But when we say alternate day, it becomes once a week or twice a week. So stick to prescribing daily, and compliance becomes an issue. If I tell you, it's a tendency, आज ये हो गया, कल दिया था, आज भूल गए, चलो कल दे देंगे. It's okay to start unless and until, of course, somebody has GI issues. If child is tolerating, then but there's no problem with the concept that yes, alternate day because of the hepcidin switch, it's better, but compliance will become an issue.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, congratulations for such a excellent presentation.
Thank you,
It
sir.
was really very simple and practical. Now, my question is, sometimes parents ask about the food which they have to give when there is iron deficiency, especially in our Punjabi culture. Which food they can easily adopt to? Because I also tell about them the iron kadai, but most of them are not comfortable with that.
Comfortable.
So,
So I
which
think
food,
good is something everybody is comfortable, sir.
which food we can suggest in daily, what we are already using out of all those items, which can be mostly focused on in case of iron deficiency?
Right. So, sir, I think that's something like green leafy vegetables is something that we can have chanas. I think that's another good source of iron. Bhuna. Sometimes I tell them evening में सारे जने भुने हुए चने गुड़ के साथ खा लो, because if you give gur with milk, it's of no use. So chanas with gur is what I tell them. Evening में give it to all your children. So, and green leafy vegetables, not paying so much stress on pomegranate, and that's a common conception. Anar. It may be by mistake. Seema.
No, it's a very, very, very important topic we always discussed on anemia days only. But in general, again, the problem is still persisting. Almost, I think, 90% of the babies they are anemic. 90%. What I have seen in our scenario, not only supplements are required, basic dietary habits need to be changed. Almost all the parents say what the complaint they say, the pizza, burger, noodles, that is the basic diet of all the kids. Chips, kurkure. So how to change that habit? Each and every shop, they are hanging this multiple type of packets. ਬੱਚਾ ਉੱਥੇ ਲੰਮਾ ਪੈ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਗੇ? So that basic system has to be changed.
Dr. Shruti,
Yes, ma'am.
do you have any experience using the nasal B12?
No, I heard about it from one of the adult colleagues that yes, there are some especially for children with malabsorption, right? Celiac disease. And there are these biofilms. That is something I've used personally, and they're like because of absorption, it gets better. So you can just put it in under your tongue and it gets absorbed. So children with malabsorption will probably there'll be the gut will be bypassed. So yes, I've used biofilm, but not the intranasal. I've heard about it from one of my adult.
True.
Hello,
Hello, sir. We couldn't hear you previously.
am I audible?
Yes,
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 sir.
sir. Now audible.
Hi. Dr. Shusi, it is an excellent presentation with practical
Thank you,
tips.
sir.
I have got one question that out of all these preparations, bisglycinase, sodium, ammonium citrate, along
Yes,
with the sulfate, which is the best? Number one. And certainly, what is the instruction for the parents to give with food, without food? Many representatives coming with that no effect of food on these absorption of these preparation, this preparation. What is your take-home message?
so I generally stick to ferrous ascorbate or ferrous fumarate, which is available freely. And my usual, prescription is give food at night and give it to the child and make the child sleep. So the GI issues, the nausea, vomiting does not, really make, does affect me. Also, we have to be particular about telling about milk intake, that there should not be any milk intake within 2 hours. Some of the adult colleagues actually prefer, I've seen in my unit also that they prefer giving it early morning empty stomach. But from my personal experience, I will tell you, I took it early morning empty stomach and I kept puking the whole day. So somehow, learning from my own body, I prescribe it at night after dinner, 1 hour, 1.5 hours after dinner. Just give the iron to child and make the child sleep so that there is no nausea, vomiting, and child sleeps through it peacefully. As far as GI complaints are concerned, we say just they get better with time. Of course, we want to avoid severe constipation and bleeding because of perianal issues because of that. So you can advise them, if it is severe constipation, they need to come back to you and tell you. But as far as any preferences required, I would say I do not. My personal experience is fumarate and ascorbate, and I usually do not use these newer preparations in most of our patients. But given that about 5 to 10% children will come back to you saying that there is some problem, the child has pain, abdomen, or diarrhea, that's when you can look into these newer preparations like the IPC formulation or Feridate or other things, and see and that is a hit and trial kind of a method. You'll have to try different preparations and see what suits the child the best.
Is there any justification in adding zinc to these iron preparations? Many companies are coming with combination with zinc.
No, sir. The only justified thing is folate. Vitamin C is still acceptable, although there are adult studies saying vitamin C added to the tablet did not result in an improved response. There are no pediatric studies, but the only justified thing as of today is folic acid. There's no harm. There's no addition of zinc. In fact, zinc can actually cause copper deficiency and anemia. If you keep giving zinc for a long time, there are case reports and there are patients who have developed copper deficiency and anemia with prolonged zinc administration.
Thank you very much. Excellent talk.
One thing I want to add that on 16th, 17th is a medical legal day, and 16th, same time we'll have again one talk by Dr. Satish Tiwari, sir. I request everyone to join.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
ठीक है. Send the flyer, sir. Send the flyer.
Just sending the flyer in by today evening. Seema is almost ready. We'll share that.
It was excellent talk.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Narayan, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you,
And
everyone.
thank you, Sunita ma'am, for all the comments. Very
Thank
well.
you. Thank you, Dr. Shruti. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Seema. Bye, dear.
Bye. Thank you, Dr. Seema. Okay.